Today, we are going to talk about how to be vulnerable and be safe at the same time. One of the things that trauma steals from us, if we want to phrase it this way, takes from us, robs from us, is our ability to be vulnerable with our partner. Because when we were vulnerable, when we needed somebody and they weren't there, and replaced it with rejection or abandonment or neglect, then this created a place and a response in our brain that says we can't be vulnerable any longer and we can't be vulnerable with others. So we have to learn how to get back to a place where we can be vulnerable with our partner, but we need to do so in a safe way. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we open up? How do we be vulnerable with our partner that also can increase our chances of a positive outcome and a sense of safety in doing so? By the end of this podcast, one, we're going to learn what healthy vulnerability looks like. Two, we're going to learn what safety means in our relationships. And three, we're going to talk about some practical steps to be able to do both. Welcome to Trauma Free Relationship. My name is Tom Philpin. I've been working with individuals and couples who struggle with relational trauma and attachment trauma for decades to help them be able to regain a sense of trust in themselves and others so that they can experience a safe and secure relationship. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, we're going to talk about how to be vulnerable with our partner and how to do so in a safe way. This is actually vital. It is key to being able to experience a safe and secure relationship. If we can't get into a place where we can be vulnerable with our partner, then it limits our ability to connect. Our vulnerability is what I term the royal road to connection. It is how we connect to others. We open up, we share some things about ourselves, we take some emotional risks with our partner in hopes that they can attune to that and respond in a loving, caring way. Trauma disrupts that. It disrupts our ability to be able to be vulnerable with others, especially our partners. And as I said, that trauma is the royal road to connection. So being able to regain that sense of vulnerability, to be able to learn how to flex that muscle again and build it up, increases our chances towards being able to reconnect and really have a deeper connection with our partner. Let's just start by talking about what is vulnerability. Vulnerability really is it's the sharing of feelings, fears, needs, or personal truths, and having some kind of certainty that our partner will respond in a loving and caring way. It is less dependent on how the person responds and more dependent, in my opinion, on us being able to set aside and move our protective parts, that part of us that sends off the anxiety, that says this is a warning, we got to be careful, we're about to be vulnerable, don't do it. And we build up our defenses either by shutting down or by replacing vulnerability with a different emotion or coming across way too aggressive and not soft and vulnerable enough. All kinds of ways that we can protect ourselves from being vulnerable. Being able to take that and set that aside and lead with a sense of core feelings, sadness, fear, whatever it might be. It could be even joy and happiness, just pure excitement about something. Sometimes being excited and taking that to our partner can be a vulnerable thing for people. They've come from an environment or they've been taught that you can't be excited about something. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, don't get excited because the rug will just be pulled out from under you. They grew up in much more of a pessimistic environment. So even something as simple as joy or excitement, they tend to dampen down. They tend to keep to themselves or justify, oh, I don't, let me think more negatively about this as opposed to more positively. So even bringing a sense of joy can be a vulnerable thing. But when we come with these truths to our partner, when we come with these feelings, needs, or expectations, there's this place we get to where we have to be able to move our protection out of the way. We have to be able to say, this is going to be okay, and soften and let our protection know, hey, thanks for being there because I know that you are trying to protect me and you're there for a good reason because of my wounds. But I don't need you right now. I need to try to get some connection with my partner. And in doing so, I need you to step aside a little bit. And so I think that's one of the greater challenges of being able to be vulnerable is, can I recognize when my protection comes up? Can I recognize when those alarm bells go off, those danger cues, and actually take that part of myself and have it step aside so that I can lead with this sense of vulnerability, that I can be more open and with my partner, and in doing so, I have now the real opportunity to be able to deepen that connection. So if you grew up with rejection, if you grew up with neglect, betrayal, your nervous system, as I said, has equated openness with danger. And that is where our protection comes up, because when you begin to feel like you're being open, when you begin to feel that sense of vulnerability, that's when your nervous system will send you those warning signals. It will say, don't do this. This is dangerous. Don't move into a place of vulnerability. And that's because our past experiences have taught us that sharing our needs, sharing our feelings, whether it be a sense of shame or joy, as I said, or sadness, they tend to not be reciprocated. We didn't have somebody there that was able to show up for us in that place and attune to our feelings, to be able to receive those feelings and hold those for us long enough that we felt like we weren't alone in those feelings. I've said this many, many times on this podcast. Oftentimes, trauma is created not always because of the event that occurred or series of events, especially with complex trauma, but because there was nobody there to help us process what was actually happening. And our body learned that nobody shows up for you in this place. When you're hurting, when bad things go down in your life, nobody's going to be there for you. And so you have to adapt to that moment or those moments, those repeated moments that happen. And that takes from you a sense of being vulnerable and how to be able to be vulnerable with others. Not everybody. And I don't want you leaving this podcast thinking that, I should just go out and I should just open my heart to anybody and everybody. No, absolutely not. People have to earn your trust. They have to earn the right for you to be vulnerable with them. So don't just walk away thinking, well, I open my heart to anybody and everybody. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability is knowing who we can trust, who we can be open with, and who truly will be there for us. So that's a little bit about how I think about and define vulnerability. I see this a lot in working, my individuals, but certainly my couples as well. When there has been a trauma, and it doesn't matter whether it's a trauma that happened in the relationship with both those partners, or whether it was a trauma that happened in the past. adolescence, or even childhood. And I get somebody to a point where I can get them to set aside their protection for a moment and try to lean into their partner. And sometimes they just look at me with these huge eyes that just scream how scared they are, because they are so afraid that if they are vulnerable, that they're going to get the same result they've always had before. And so it takes a lot of work and a lot of bravery and a lot of risk taking to be able to step into those moments, to recognize them, and to lean into those moments so that you can actually get a different result. This is the beauty of couples work. This is the beauty of having a partner who can show up for you differently than a dad did, show up for you differently than a mom did, show up for you differently than a best friend or an abusive uncle, or whatever the trauma might have been. You have a partner that can give you a different outcome and help you learn and relearn and reteach your central nervous system that vulnerability is okay. Vulnerability can be safe. So let's talk about what safety looks like in our relationships. We've kind of defined vulnerability now. We kind of get the idea. Let's talk about, what does it mean to be safe in our relationships? Well, by safe, I don't mean something that's completely void of risk. So I think there's always some risk. Even in safe and secure relationships, when you've had past trauma, there's always a little bit of risk that comes up for you. And so I don't want us to equate safety meaning that there's zero risk. It feels completely safe. It's always a sense of security. Our alarm bells would never go off. That's not what I mean. What I do mean is that safety means that you can trust yourself and handle your emotions. That you're not going to pop out of the window of tolerance. You're not going to go into fight or flight at the first sign that your partner might not be receiving your vulnerability. It means that you're able to stay long enough with those vulnerable emotions that you don't convert them to anger, or that your defenses don't jump back in. And so that would be the first sign of safety, is that you're able to do the internal work yourself to be able to stay in a place of vulnerability. One of the things I see a lot when I'm helping my couples is one partner will reach out and lean in to being vulnerable with their partner. But then at the very first sign that somehow their partner might miss this, might not get it, they might perceive, or it might even be real, that this isn't going well, they immediately abandon their vulnerability and they immediately go back into their protection. And they have to be able to stay with that vulnerability long enough for it to be received by their partner. So I would say that is one of the things that we have to do, is be able to regulate our own emotions long enough so that we can stay vulnerable. Not because there's zero risk, but because we've done the work we need to do to be able to stay with our vulnerable feelings or needs long enough to be able to communicate those to our partner. I think the second thing is being able to communicate at a pace that is comfortable for you. So a vulnerable moment might be for you being able to not retreat immediately. If you fall into more of the avoidance style of attachment, and your partner comes to you and they're wanting to talk to you about something that has to do with the relationship, your body might immediately respond and say, shut down. Here we go again. We're going to go into another argument. Oh my gosh, here we go again. Retreat, retreat, retreat. Vulnerability for you might be, you know what? I'm going to listen openly. I'm going to listen non-judgmentally. And I'm going to try to stay in a vulnerable place a little bit longer than I usually do. And so sometimes being vulnerable means just being able to not go into and retreat to your protection as quickly as you do. If you're more on the anxious style of the spectrum, maybe it means you learn to regulate your emotions a little bit better so you don't come in so hot and so amped up and already expecting your partner to shut down and move away and that you'll be abandoned and not heard and so on and so forth. So sometimes vulnerability can be trying to stay open and trying to stay connected a little bit longer than what we would normally do what we normally could or would do. And so being able to come in and stay emotionally engaged can very much be an act of vulnerability. So how do we put these two together? We've learned what vulnerability is. It is taking a risk to be open with your thoughts, feelings, needs, expectations to your partner, something that would be risky for whatever context that is for you. We've also learned that a way to be safe, or a couple of ways to be safe, is to one, be able to take it at a pace that's comfortable for you, but also being able to trust yourself, stay regulated, and try to hold off from going back into your emotion too quickly. That can also help you create some sense of safety. So how do we combine these? How do we put ourselves in a place where we can communicate our vulnerability and try to be safe as well? Well, one of the first things, and I always start with this because it is always so important, we got to go inside. We got to go inward, and we got to recognize what those vulnerable moments look like and feel like in our body. And this is absolutely crucial. We have to be able to understand those warning bells that go off, those signals that get sent to us that say danger, danger, and when we start to move into our protection and our defenses, because those are the biggest barriers to vulnerability. So awareness of those moments is absolutely crucial. I think being able to stay within the window of tolerance, again, if you're aware of those moments, for you being vulnerable might be trying to hold off going into your protection, evoking your defenses, shutting down, or replacing your emotion, or popping out of the window of tolerance and going into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, whatever that might be. That to you could be a vulnerable moment. And so that awareness of how your body's responding in the moment, the ability to stay in the window of tolerance, and then third, I think being able to set some boundaries around vulnerability. So what does that mean? It might mean simply communicating to your partner that this feels like a vulnerable moment for you. Could they slow down a little bit? Could they soften a little bit? Could we just slow this process down? I'm feeling vulnerable and I'm really trying to stay open and I'm trying to listen non-judgmentally, or I'm really trying to communicate something that's important to me. Could we just slow this down a little bit? Could we just stop and pause? This is really important to me, and I'm trying to do some of my own work here, and I would really appreciate it if we could just sort of slow this down. Being able to communicate something like that, I think, is absolutely crucial. Because one, it should be able to tell your partner that you're doing the work. It should be able to tell your partner, hey, this is one of those moments that I can recognize and I can see and I need your help with. And so being able to communicate those vulnerable moments, I think, is absolutely crucial, especially if you and your partner both have some past trauma. Because it is possible your vulnerability can trigger your partner's protection. And this is where our different parts get all mixed up, right? Your vulnerability might actually trigger your partner's wound. And so when that happens, the chance of an escalation, the chance of falling back into our cycle can be all that much more likely. So being able to communicate that this is a vulnerable moment for me, here's what's going on inside of me, my body's telling me I'm taking a risk here. Can we stop? Can we slow this down? Can you just be a little bit softer with me here? I really need that because I'm trying to be more vulnerable and be more open and listen more openly and non-defensively to you. And that can be a great way to be able to create a sense of safety while also being vulnerable. I want to do a quick aside here because I just hit onto something that's really important, something that I think you might, and maybe I need to do a whole different podcast on this, is when your vulnerability might trigger your partner's wound. It is very possible that some people have wounds around others' vulnerability. They may have had a mother or a father who was sickly growing up, and they used their sickness, their vulnerability, as a weapon, as a tool to abuse or neglect or abandon or whatever that might be their own child. Or maybe there was something in your adolescence where somebody else's vulnerability became weaponized for you. And if that is the case, it is very possible that when your partner shows up and tries to be vulnerable, that could actually be triggering for you. And so if you are one of these people that somebody's vulnerability was actually weaponized, if somebody's vulnerability was used against you or to manipulate you or control you, then you've got your own work to do so that your partner's vulnerability doesn't become triggering to you. Maybe you learned that when somebody was vulnerable or you were vulnerable, you were shamed around that. And so now what you do is when your partners are vulnerable, you see them as weak. You see them as lacking in a certain strength of will, if you will. And you shame them. Maybe not so much with words, but maybe with certain actions, or maybe you roll your eyes, or whatever that might be. This is one of those situations where maybe somebody else's vulnerability is actually triggering to you. So I think that's really important to be able to recognize that sometimes vulnerability can be triggering to a partner. I don't see that a ton. I've certainly seen that. That's certainly happened where people see vulnerability as weakness because they were shamed or it was used to control them. But I wouldn't say that's the vast majority of it. So hopefully you have a partner that is not triggered by your vulnerability, but rather welcomes it because they want to be more connected to you. And so if they can recognize those vulnerable moments, then they can hopefully move out of their protection, their avoidant, anxious, or disorganized style of protection, and be able to be more open with you there. Another thing I think is how do we practice vulnerability and safety is to start small. And don't think about coming to your partner or a best friend or anybody else that you might want to take that risk with. Don't think about coming to them in a way where you're going to start with the biggest vulnerability of all. Don't do that. Start small. And so you can begin, with a small hurt, something that happened very recently, as opposed to the biggest wound that you've been holding for years, that kind of a thing. We don't want to do that. I think another way to practice being vulnerable and safe is to use both and language. Remember, multiple things can be true at once. You can be struggling with your tone and struggling with your moving your protection out of the way, and also be trying to work towards more openness and more vulnerability with your partner. Two things can be true at the same time. I'm scared to do this, and I'm feeling closer to you. I'm popping back and forth between wanting to protect myself and trying to let down my walls so you can see I'm being vulnerable and open with you. So being able to use both and language, not either or, but both and, can be helpful sometimes too, because your partner can perceive you struggling maybe emotionally with this. They can see, oh, you've got your wall up here for a minute, but oh, now it doesn't feel like your wall's up. And so it might be confusing to them as you struggle with that. So in addition to being able to communicate, hey, this is a vulnerable moment for me, could we take this slow, or could you be a little bit softer with me? Being also able to say, hey, I'm scared to do this, but I also recognize it's really important. And occasionally, it may come across messy. It may come across with a little bit of a tone, and I don't mean it like that. So being able to use that either or language, I think, can be important as well. Another tool I think that is good is having a plan, rehearsing what you might want to say. If you're going to go talk to your partner about something, um, and you know it's going to be a vulnerable conversation, don't be afraid to rehearse it. Don't be afraid to come in and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something. This is a little bit vulnerable for me to do it. I'd really appreciate you being able to just sort of let me get it out. And it's not going to be perfect. This may be kind of messy. Before you dive into any particular word or phrase, I might say, please kind of let me just get through this, because I really need you to hear this, and I really am trying to be vulnerable and open so that we don't fall back into a cycle. So being able to, what we call platform, being able to sort of state your expectations of what you need, can be very helpful to being able to feel safe before you go into your vulnerability as well. What are some potential signs that your partner might be a safe person for you to be able to be open and vulnerable with? Well, one of the first things is, as I've mentioned several times, they might be able to listen non-judgmentally. They might be able to give you that time. Oh, okay, you need to talk to me. Okay, no problem. I'll just sit and I'll listen, and I'll recognize that this can come out kind of messy and not perfect, and I won't latch on to any word or jump in. I'll just listen to you as a whole, and I will try to do so in a very open, non-judgmental way. I think having a partner that's able to validate how you feel. They don't have to agree with everything you say. They don't even have to agree with your personal truth, but they can certainly validate your feelings. I can see where that would be fearful for you. I can see why that was triggering and made you upset. Having a partner that can validate your feelings, and validation simply means being able to communicate to you that they understand where you're coming from. They may not agree. They may have some points that they struggle with. It could be something that's completely outside of their own realm of experience, but nonetheless, you can see them making that effort that, yes, I can see why you would feel this way, or I can see how that would be triggering or would bring up that feeling for you. So having a partner that can validate your feelings makes it all that much more safe for you. Having a partner that's able to stay open themselves, as I said, and non-judgmental is really important. And having a partner that's able to communicate if they're having a vulnerable moment as well, I think is crucial. So as you're expressing to them this is vulnerable, they might even be able to say, and I'm feeling vulnerable just listening to you be vulnerable. And that actually makes me want to open up and be vulnerable. So being able to have a partner exhibit a couple of those traits, if you will, I don't know what we quite want to call them, but those skills, abilities to validate your feelings, to try to listen non-judgmentally, that's going to help you, one, be able to pick the right moments, but two, I think, be able to increase the likelihood that you're going to have a good response from your partner. Okay, these are just some thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot more on the subjects I could share, but these are some thoughts that I see a lot that people with relational attachment trauma struggle with when they start trying to be vulnerable. And that is that safety is equal to a connected to yourself. It's not control over your partner. Safety means that you have your internal trust. You trust yourself. You trust yourself to stay in the window. You can trust yourself to be open. You're working towards regaining trust in others, but you trust your feelings, and you own your own truth, and you own your own needs, and you can feel comfortable about that. So there's an internal safety that it starts with before we can reach out and feel safe with others. And so vulnerability can start small and then grow stronger over time. So take it a piece at a time, especially if you have a partner that is willing and able to do that for you, because I think that's absolutely crucial in being able to regain that sense of trust in others. But some of this, as I mentioned, starts with your own work, being able to trust yourself, and being able to be vulnerable and open to yourself and recognize those moments even before you go to your partner. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed today. Thank you so much for listening. My name's Tom Philp, and I'm here to remind you to stay grounded, clear, and connected.